Today we're talking about how to stop eating when you're bored. And the 3 steps are to first even see if you're really bored. Maybe you're stressed out. That's the first step, understanding your triggers. Second, maybe you are hungry. Maybe you're not eating enough. Third, maybe you are bored. If you've done the first 2 steps, you understand your triggers, your emotional state, and you know if you're hungry or not, then you come to conclusions, you probably are bored. And then you do need to just tap into some willpower, some motivation, some passion. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna relate not eating when you're bored to my journey with marijuana. Because down in the link below, there's a link down below where you can also watch a video where I made where I used how I overcame using marijuana for coping with depression and sadness. And it's the same thing. Marijuana for depression, it makes that depression go away. And I abused the shit out of it. I abused marijuana for years. And I've overcome that. And the same thing can happen for you with food. Food might, you might be using food to cover up sadness, or in this video we're talking about boredom. You might use food to escape boredom. Just like I used food when I was bored, or I used marijuana when I was bored. And before we do get started, if you go ahead and like this video, if you find the content interesting, go ahead and give it a like. What I'll do at the end of this short video is there'll be a recap where I'll just kind of put every insight together into an exercise. I want you to try that exercise. If you're serious about this, I want you to try this exercise and then leave a comment. Just let me know how it goes, or if you have a question, or just give me some feedback on how this exercise goes. It involves these 3 steps, which I'll repeat again. Understand your psychology, understand if you're actually hungry, and then third, develop passion. So, big picture understanding is sometimes when you're bored, like I remember I would smoke weed all the time, but oftentimes I was lonely. That is not the same as boredom per se. So we're strictly talking about how to not eat when you're bored here today. And the first step of that is understanding, are you really bored? Maybe you're lonely. That's okay. No judgment, but we got to get clear if we're actually talking about boredom, because weed can be used to blunt or numb negative feelings, just like food can be used to blunt or numb negative feelings. But it's a different conversation when you're numbing feelings versus when you are, when you're bored. When you're bored, the mindset is more like, well, I have nothing better to do. When you're bored, it's like, oh, I might as well smoke weed. I'm not sad. I'm not lonely. I'm just bored. So I'm going to smoke weed, or I'm going to eat food. Might as well. There's kind of this like, why not attitude toward it. And so it's really important. The first step is, are you bored? Be honest. Maybe you're stressed and you're working. I just had a story the other day where 2 women came in and they were kind of like talking about one woman's problem with boredom and eating, which is why I'm bringing up this topic today. But it sounded like they were nurses. The woman was a nurse, who in question was a nurse. And she had this crazy boss and a crazy schedule. But the thing is that she would get bored when she'd get home. And so she was coming in and saying, I have bored eating. I get bored when I'm home. It's like I'm a fish out of water. The hospital gives me all this stress and adrenaline, and then I don't have any work to take home with me. So I go home and I'm bored. And that may be the case. But you have to examine your emotional state when you're actually bored, quote unquote. Because I'm betting this woman, she probably is carrying a lot of tension. Tension doesn't feel good. I'm betting she's actually eating to avoid feeling bad, which is different than boredom. So first, understand, are you bored, or are you trying to numb a negative feeling? Okay, when you're bored, you're actually not that tense. You're kind of even relaxed even. You're bored. So when you're bored, then understand those triggers. Like when does this happen? You have to study this. You have to study this. This is not something that just happens overnight where you understand your psychology around boredom and eating. You got to know, like, is it Saturday afternoons when you're bored? If you really are bored, and this is not a stress thing, really kind of understanding, like, when am I bored? What happens? When do I get bored? When do I use food to cope with my boredom? And then understanding too the psychology. What benefits? How does eating food get me out of boredom? Really get clear on that. So you start understanding, you're bored one Saturday afternoon and you say, oh, I want some food. What do you want from that food? Because this brings me to step number 2. You might actually be hungry or dehydrated. Let's say you have a bag of chips and you're bored, and then an hour later you have another bag of chips. Is that bored eating? Because I would say no. The time you have the first chips, you might be hungry. And then a bag of chips is not going to fill you up. It's not sustainable fuel. So you're still going to be hungry an hour later when you have another bag of chips. In the back of your head, you might be labeling this as bored eating because you're bored and you're eating. But really, the truth is you might be hungry. You're not getting nutrients in your body. You could fill up your belly with white bread and you would still be hungry. Your belly would still want something, because we humans, we want nutrients. So if you're dehydrated, if you're not getting balanced meals, you're gonna want more food. And even if you are eating, let's say you have, just for example, a ton of carbs, a ton of white bread, you feel like your belly is full, but then you want more food and you don't understand why. The key is you might be lacking nutrients, which is driving your hunger. You might misinterpret that as actual boredom. You might not be getting enough nutrients and feel bored and then think that you're eating when you're bored, but really you're lacking nutrients. So just to recap real quick here, boredom is tricky. Oftentimes it's not boredom, quite frankly. That's why the first 2 steps, when you try to think about stopping to eat when you're bored, stopping eating when you're bored, it's important to recognize, like, are you actually bored, or are you one, stressed out, depressed, lonely? I know with weed, I would smoke all the time and I knew I was doing it, abusing it. I knew I was lonely. I knew I was depressed. I knew I was anxious, and I knew I was numbing. Okay, so with that awareness, there's a certain that awareness is just so key. Like, understanding this whole emotional eating thing, you have to really bring a lot of awareness to this whole process. This isn't just going to go away overnight. You have to familiarize yourself with all these psychological triggers, understanding that yes, this is a numbing feeling. I'm getting benefit out of this numbingness. In case of when you're bored, you realize, oh, the benefit is me getting a little adrenaline burst as for food, it's thinking, oh man, what type of food am I gonna get? The flavor, there's a positive feeling right there. You got to understand what you're running away from and what you're getting out of this whole process. That's step 1. Second step is actually, realizing you might not be bored eating, you might be hungry. You might not be eating enough balanced meals. That's why when I work with people, it's like one of the first things we start to talk about is basic nutritional principles. Are you actually getting balanced meals? Because if you're not getting nutrients or enough water, you will be hungry. And if you're hungry, you might misinterpret that hunger as bored eating. That's what I'm betting, again, was another thing with this nurse. So this nurse who came in, the way she was speaking, I only met her one time, so I don't have a whole lot of information, but she was fidgety. And her energy was kind of stressful and anxious energy. So when she said she was bored, it just didn't resonate for me. Maybe she is bored, but it's like a hyperactive boredom. It's like a stress-fueled boredom. And a stress-fueled boredom is more likely where you're numbing negative feelings. And in addition to that, that kind of is more about the step one. This woman, what did we talk about? Food. We didn't really talk about food, but she did mention eating a lot of white rice. And so white rice doesn't have a lot of nutrients. You could eat a ton of white rice and get your belly all filled up. It might even be uncomfortably full, and you still want more food because you are lacking nutrients. So then therefore, you got to actually eat nutrients so you're not boredom eating. And then lastly, this is the third step that is so critical. If you have crossed off the list that you're not emotionally triggered, you are not hungry, and you really are bored, you need a vision. You need some passion. Now, that might sound cliche. That might sound lame. That might sound like you've heard it all before. And if that's you, I want you just to be compassionate towards yourself, to reflect, to not judge yourself. Having a vision and a goal is oftentimes misunderstood. You need something that makes you feel good, like music or going on a walk. And I know you've heard this all before, like when you're sad, go on a walk, or go exercise when you're sad, or when you're bored, just go do something. That's superficial right there. I'm talking your boredom, is a spiritual sign of how you can step into your next level of life. Your boredom, if you can solve this, will transform you. The only way you can solve boredom long term is by doing something you like to do and liking to do something. That's one of my biggest struggles. I grew up in a household where not a lot of emotions were exchanged. So, I'm pretty flat. Like, I don't get sad that easy. And I've increased my emotional range dramatically. But when I first began this journey, it was like, I didn't get sad, I didn't get happy. I would be bored all the time, I'd smoke weed. When I started identifying that I was bored, I started thinking about a vision and finding stuff that I liked to do, I became a better person. Now, this didn't just stop overnight. I've kind of threaded the comment throughout this video. It didn't just stop overnight. But when I was bored, I would think about stuff I wanted to do instead. And I'd try, you got to try these new activities and you got to pay attention. I think a lot of people, they try new activities and they have these high standards and they want these activities to feel good, but they don't maybe emotionally feel good. Like, for example, maybe volunteering. This sounds so bad of me, but like, I've done some volunteering and I got this buzz because I was volunteering and I did feel good. But like, just in this particular example, the person in charge of the volunteers, they didn't really acknowledge me, or they didn't really acknowledge anyone. They weren't even there. And there was no like intermingling with all the other volunteers. And so I had an excitement, and it was like picking up trash basically. And so I had excitement because I was volunteering, but this excitement, and there was a thought that I was not doing something, I was doing something instead of being bored. But truth be told, I wasn't emotionally happy. I wasn't really liking it. So by learning how to act on things that I actually like, I actually stopped getting bored. Now this took a while, but those are the 3 steps. So the exercise today, just simply inquire, introspect, reflect, analyze. Are you bored? Are you really bored? Because I'm betting, I don't know, I'm betting that you're not. I'm betting that you're avoiding something. So if that's you, if you're brave enough, comment below. All right, have a good one. Peace.